Today, we'll be looking at the orchestration of the YouTube intro music from last time. Now, I've also made some motion graphics to go along with this in a program called DaVinci Resolve. They have a free version of the program that's incredibly powerful. So if you'd like to try doing your own motion graphics, I would highly recommend that program. Let's start by looking at the piano sketch from last time and see how we've taken that piano sketch and made it for the full orchestra. I've pasted the piano sketch into the full score just so that I can use it as a reference. I often do this. One of the great things about Dorico is that you can suppress the playback of these stays if you want, or just hide them and then that will turn them off. But I really like to have them here as a reference point. So let's listen to that piano sketch. As we talked about last time, this voicing at the end of the piece as it comes to rest is very important because I'll be speaking over that. And I thought that the voicing that I have now in the piano would translate very well to the low brass, to the trombones and tuba. Let's take a look at what I've done here. In this final measure, our voicing in the trombones and tuba looks very similar to what we had in the piano, but it's not exactly the same. If we were to have taken the piano voicing and translated it into these brass parts, it would have looked something like this. But you'll notice in this voicing there's no G. Why is that? The reason is that we are going to rest on a C major triad. And I found that as I was writing the French horn part, that I could suspend this A flat, which would be the fifth of the D flat major 7 chord, into our C major chord. And that would change that chord into an A flat major 7 sharp 5. Now, if we didn't have the G still in this voicing, then it would be a C augmented triad going to C. But I wanted to have this A flat major 7 sharp 5 because it harkens back to the beginning of the piece where we use that major 7 sharp 5 sound. So I thought it was a clever way to delay this resolution to the C major triad. Now the reason I didn't put the G in this voicing is because if we have the G below the A flat in our voicing, then we get this kind of sound. This flat 9 sound. And that's not exactly right for this piece. That kind of dissonance would be fine for a lot of pieces, but I think for this piece, it's just a little bit too harsh. So by moving all of the G's up above the A flats, we get a much more appropriate sound for this piece. Let's listen to all of the brass playing here from the third measure, going into this suspension of the A flat, and then resolving into the G of the C major triad. Now, we won't hear the G's that are played above this A flat because they're in the woodwinds and in the strings, but you'll still get an idea of what this sounds like. Let's have a listen to that. As you can see, even in this short example, orchestration is many times an extension of the composing process. You're writing new lines for the instruments. You're coming up with ideas like this suspension, which changes the harmonic structure of the piece. And of course, this is my own piece, so I feel free to do that. If I was orchestrating another composer's piece, I wouldn't change their harmonies. But in my own piece, this opens up new ideas and adds depth to the piece that I might not have found in the initial sketch. Once I had this voicing for the trombones and tuba at the end in this little build-up, I worked my way backwards using notes from the chords to fill out the harmonies and the low brass. Let's take a look now at what I've written for the strings. I've given the melody to the violins 1 And in the second half of the phrase, I've transposed that up an octave to add some excitement and change in the color. Let's take a listen to that. When I was first considering what this melody should be, I talked about something that would be memorable and singable, but also about leaving space in that melody so that we could have more movement in the inner parts. Here where we have these two half notes, you can see that we have these very quick moving lines in the violins too and the violas. And they're even faster because of the way that they interlock. So we've got a constant 16th note triplet playing through this because of these interlocking lines. Let's listen to each line separately and then we'll hear them together. And now together. These kind of lines can add a lot of energy to the orchestration, and they're able to sit below the main melody, especially the way that we've doubled this melody in other instruments. Now, this line may look very complicated, but it's really all notes that belong to our A flat major 7 sharp 11 chord. So we're using the A flat Lydian scale here, and all those notes come from that. Let's listen to all of the strings together. Our basses and cellos are just laying down harmonic foundations so that it pulls the whole thing together. Let's listen to the strings. Looking at the woodwinds, they're mostly doubling what we saw in the strings and the brass. The English horn and the clarinet too are doubling that quick line we saw in the violins too, and the bass clarinet and the bassoon are doubling that quick line that we saw in the violas. The piccolo, the flutes, and the oboe are doubling the melody, where the bassoon too is doubling the bass line. Now, one thing I want to touch on is this line in the clarinet too. There's something called the break on the clarinet, and that happens between the low and middle register, the chalumeau register and the clarion register. And sometimes in a newer player that can cause a squeak. There's some problems with airflow and having to use more fingers to play the B natural when you go above that break. So going from an A to a B can sometimes be a little bit problematic for a newer player. For professionals, it's really not a problem. They have a way past this. And I used to worry very much about this when I would write something across the break. But with professionals, you really don't have to worry about this. You can even trill across the break from an A to a B. They have what's called a trill key to do that. So I would say, don't be too concerned about writing across the break. Just be aware that it exists. And if you want to write a part for the clarinet that's idiomatic, don't write a part that constantly crosses that break for the entire piece. All right, I think it's time we take a listen to the full piece. And I'm going to play it with the logo that I designed. Now, I am not a motion graphics designer, but I did have a lot of fun making this logo. Next time, I'm going to start on a new film score, so that should be interesting. And I just want to thank everyone for following along. And now, without further ado, here's the new YouTube intro.